The wind howled like a wounded beast through the narrow passes of the Rocky Mountains, carrying with it a wall of snow so thick a man couldn't see his own hand stretched before him. February of 1856 had been cruel, even by the standards of these unforgiving peaks, and the blizzard that now raged was the worst yet. Jeremiah Cole pulled his beaver fur coat tighter around his shoulders as he trudged through knee-deep snow, his breath forming ice crystals on his thick beard. He'd lived alone in these mountains for 7 winters now, ever since he'd walked away from Fort Laramie and the uniform he'd worn as a cavalry scout. The memories of what happened there, the orders he couldn't follow, the blood on innocent hands, still haunted him on nights when the wind grew quiet. His small cabin sat nestled in a grove of pines, barely visible through the storm. He'd built it himself, log by log, in a spot where fresh water ran year-round and the southern exposure gave him precious hours of winter sun. It wasn't much, but it was far from the world of men and their endless appetite for violence. Jeremiah was heading back from checking his trap lines, all of them empty due to the storm, when something caught his eye, a dark shape against the white, too large to be a wolf. Wrong shape for an elk. He squinted through the driving snow and made out the form of a dead horse, its legs frozen stiff, already half buried in a drift. He almost turned away. Dead horses were common enough in these parts, but then he saw movement, just a flutter of cloth in the wind. Someone was huddled against the horse's belly, using the carcass as a windbreak. Jeremiah approached cautiously, his Henry rifle ready in his hands. In these mountains, desperation could make even good folks dangerous. As he drew closer, he saw it was a woman, her face blue-white with cold, ice forming on her eyelashes. She was wrapped in what had once been a fine woolen traveling cloak, now torn and crusted with snow. "Ma'am?" His voice was rough from disuse. He hadn't spoken to another soul since trading furs at the settlement 2 months back. No response. He knelt beside her, pulling off his mitten to feel for a pulse at her neck. There, faint as a butterfly's wing, but there, she was alive. Barely. "Mountain Man." The words came out as barely a whisper, her lips cracked and bleeding. "You saved me from the blizzard." She was delirious with cold. He hadn't saved anyone yet, but if he didn't move fast, there'd be nothing left to save. Jeremiah slung his rifle over his shoulder and gathered the woman in his arms. She weighed next to nothing, bird bones under all those wet clothes. As he lifted her, something hard pressed against his chest, something angular beneath her bodice. No time to investigate. The storm was worsening, and hypothermia didn't wait for convenient moments. He carried her through the deepening snow, his powerful legs pushing through drifts that would have stopped a lesser man. By the time he reached his cabin, his muscles burned and his lungs ached from the effort. The cabin's interior was blessedly warm, the fire he'd banked that morning still glowing in the stone hearth. He laid the woman on his narrow bed, the only soft surface in the sparse room, and set about reviving the flames. Soon, orange light danced across the log walls, and heat began to fill the small space. Now came the delicate work. The woman's clothes were soaked through and frozen stiff. Leaving them on would kill her as surely as the storm would have. Jeremiah had doctored plenty of men in his cavalry days, but this was different. He worked quickly and professionally, averting his eyes as much as possible while peeling away the frozen layers. It was when he removed her bodice that he found them folded squares of oiled parchment tucked against her chest, wrapped in what looked like waterproof cloth, even through his focus on saving her life. Jeremiah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Maps. His soldier's eye recognized them instantly, even folded as they were. He set them aside and continued his work, wrapping the woman in his thick buffalo robe and positioning her close to the fire. Her skin had the waxy look of severe frostbite, particularly on her fingers and toes. He heated water and began the painful process of warming her extremities, knowing that too much heat too fast could be as dangerous as the cold itself. While he worked, his eyes kept drifting to those folded papers, maps hidden that carefully meant secrets. Secrets in these mountains usually meant gold, and gold meant blood. He'd come to these peaks to escape such things, to live simply with his traps and his guilt, far from the greed and violence of civilization. The woman moaned softly as feeling returned to her limbs. Good pain meant life. He spooned warm broth between her lips, made from rabbit and wild roots, seasoned with herbs he'd learned about from an old Shoshone medicine man. She swallowed reflexively, color slowly returning to her cheeks. As the night wore on and the storm raged outside, Jeremiah found himself studying his unexpected guest. She was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 25 summers to his 32. Her hands, though frostbitten, were soft, uncalloused. A lady's hands, her face, even drawn with exhaustion and pain, had a refinement that spoke of Eastern breeding. What was a woman like this doing alone in these mountains in the dead of winter? His eyes returned once more to the maps. Every instinct he'd developed in 7 years of mountain living screamed danger. Whatever those papers contained, they were important enough for someone to risk and likely lose their life over, important enough to hide against her very skin. Jeremiah added another log to the fire and settled into his chair, rifle across his knees. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, their voices mixing with the wind's fury. Inside, the woman's breathing had steadied, the rise and fall of the buffalo robe reassuring in its rhythm. He should burn those maps, he thought, throw them in the fire and pretend he'd never seen them. Nothing good ever came from such secrets. But something stayed his hand, perhaps duty to the woman who'd nearly died protecting them, perhaps simple curiosity, or perhaps the soldier in him that could never quite let go of questions that needed answers. The storm would blow itself out eventually. When it did, whoever was looking for this woman, and someone surely would come calling. The marks of her horse were already buried, but men who tracked in these mountains knew how to read more than just prints in snow. They read the patterns of shelter, the logic of survival. They would find his cabin eventually. Jeremiah reached for his whetstone and began sharpening his knife, the rhythmic scraping a meditation against the storm's chaos. Whatever those maps led to, whatever war they might start. He'd made his choice the moment he'd picked up the half-frozen woman. He'd saved her from the blizzard, and now he'd have to save her from whatever came next. The wind screamed louder, as if in protest, and somewhere in the darkness, he thought he heard the distant crack of a rifle, but it might have been just a tree breaking under the weight of snow. In these mountains, in storms like this, a man could never be certain what was real and what was the voice of his own fears. The woman stirred slightly, mumbling words he couldn't catch. Jeremiah pulled the buffalo robe higher around her shoulders and returned to his vigil. Dawn was still hours away, and in the savage heart of a Rocky Mountain winter, hours could feel like lifetimes. The woman's eyes snapped open like a startled deer's wide, terrified, darting around the unfamiliar cabin. She tried to sit up, gasped at the pain in her frost-touched limbs, and scrambled backward until her shoulders hit the log wall. The buffalo robe slipped, and she clutched it to herself with trembling hands. "Easy now," Jeremiah said from his chair by the fire, keeping his voice low and steady, the way he'd gentle a spooked horse. "You're safe. Storm's still blowing outside, but you're warm and alive." Her gaze fixed on him, taking in his bulk, his wild beard, the rifle resting across his knees. He could see her mind working, calculating threats and escapes. Her eyes flickered to the door, barred against the wind, then to the single window, shuttered tight. Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, cultured despite the roughness. "Boston, maybe, or Philadelphia. Where's my horse?" "Dead when I found you. You were using it for shelter." He rose slowly, setting the rifle aside, and moved to the pot hanging over the fire. "Been 2 days since I brought you in. You need to eat." 2 days? She pulled the robe tighter, and he saw her hand move searchingly across her chest, looking for the maps. No doubt. Her face went pale when she found them gone. "Your things are there." He nodded to where he'd folded her dried clothing on a wooden chest, the wrapped maps placed deliberately on top. "Didn't look at them, if that's what you're wondering." It was a lie, but a small one. He'd glanced, just enough to confirm his suspicions. Detailed terrain, water sources, passages marked in code, the kind of maps that armies paid in blood to possess. She stared at him with those sharp green eyes, measuring the truth of his words. "You're lying." "Maybe." He ladled broth into a wooden bowl. "But I'm also the only reason you're not frozen solid out there. So maybe we can start with names instead of accusations. I'm Jeremiah Cole." A long pause. "Elizabeth." No family name, which told him plenty. "Elizabeth Hartley." "Well, Miss Hartley, you need to get some food in you before we discuss whatever trouble you're running from." "I'm not running from anything." But her eyes shifted away as she said it. "Sure you're not. Ladies regularly travel these mountains alone in winter for the scenery." He held out the bowl. "Eat." She had to let the robe slip to take it, wincing as she moved her bandaged fingers. He'd done his best with the frostbite, but she'd likely lose at least one fingertip. She sipped the broth carefully, her body gradually relaxing as warmth spread through her. "You're military," she said after a moment. It wasn't a question. "Was deserter?" He felt his jaw tighten. "Discharged, honorably." Another lie, but his business wasn't hers. "And now you live alone in these mountains like a hermit." Hermits don't save half-dead women from blizzards. That earned him the ghost of a smile. "I suppose they don't." She took another sip, then asked, "How long until the storm passes?" "Day or two more, judging by the feel of it. These late winter storms, they dig in deep before they let go." Her fingers tightened on the bowl. "They'll be looking for me?" "Figured as much." He settled back in his chair. "Want to tell me who they are?" Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My father was Charles Hartley. Perhaps you've heard the name. He had Hartley the surveyor, who'd mapped half the territories for the government before disappearing 3 months back. Heard he went missing up near South Pass." "He didn't go missing. He was murdered." The words came out flat, emotionless. "Shot in the back while I held the horses. I couldn't save him. Could only take what he'd died protecting and run." "The maps." She nodded. 20 years of his life in those papers. Every hidden valley, every water source the Shoshone showed him, every passage the mountain men whispered about when they were deep in their cups, and the gold. Her laugh was bitter. Always the gold. Enough strikes marked to make 100 men rich, or start a war that would make thousands dead. Jeremiah understood now. Maps like that would bring every gold-hungry fool in the territories running, not to mention the army, the railroad companies, and Lord knew who else. Who killed him? Harrison Becker's men. You know the name? He did. Becker ran the largest mining consortium west of Denver, with judges in his pocket and hired guns on his payroll. So you took the maps and ran. "What else could I do? Go to the law?" She shook her head. "Becker owns the law in these parts. The army? They'd take the maps and probably hand them right to him for the right price. So yes, I ran. Thought I could make it to Fort Bridger. Find someone there who..." She trailed off, shoulders sagging. "I was a fool. A city woman who thought she could outride winter itself. You made it further than most would have, only to bring my troubles to your door." She met his eyes again. "I should leave as soon as the storm breaks. You don't want any part of this." Bit late for that decision. He stood, adding another log to the fire. "Besides, you're in no shape to travel. That frostbite needs tending for at least a week, and you're weak as a newborn colt. You'd not make it a mile." "Then what do you propose?" He was quiet for a moment, listening to the wind howl outside. In 7 years of solitude, he'd found a kind of peace in these mountains. No orders to follow, no innocence in the crossfire, just the simple rhythm of survival. Now this woman had brought the outside world crashing back into his life. "For now, you rest and heal," he said finally. "When you're stronger, we'll figure out what comes next." She studied him with those sharp eyes. "Why?" Why help me at all? You could have left me in the snow, could still turn me out, or take the maps for yourself. It was a fair question. Why had he saved her? Duty? Loneliness? Some remnant of the man he'd been before Sand Creek had shown him what following orders could lead to. Maybe I'm just not the leaving folks to die type, he said. Everyone's that type when their own survival's at stake. Then maybe I'm a fool too. That earned him another, almost smile. She finished the broth and handed back the bowl. Thank you for the food, and for not being the leaving folks to die type. Over the next days, they fell into an uneasy rhythm. The storm continued to rage, sealing them in their small world of firelight and log walls. Elizabeth grew stronger, though her hands remained painful and she tired easily. She helped what little she could, tending the fire while he saw to necessary tasks, mending his clothes with clumsy, bandaged fingers. They talked, carefully at first, sharing stories that revealed little. She spoke of growing up in Boston, of her education, of following her father west after her mother died. He told her about trapping, about reading weather sign, about which herbs could break a fever and which roots could fill a belly. Neither spoke of the maps, though they sat there like a third presence in the cabin. On the fourth night, as wind still rattled the shutters, she asked, "What really made you leave the army?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Sand Creek, November of '64. You hear about it? She shook her head. Volunteer cavalry hit a peaceful Cheyenne camp at dawn. Women, children, old folks. I was supposed to scout for them, make sure no warriors escaped. His voice was steady, but his knuckles were white where he gripped his coffee cup. I refused, rode away instead. They called it desertion. I called it keeping what was left of my soul. Elizabeth was silent, understanding now the weight he carried, the reason for his self-imposed exile. My father used to say the frontier brings out what's truest in a man, she said softly. The brave become braver, the greedy greedier, the cruel. She didn't finish. And the cowardly, he asked. You're not a coward. A coward would have followed orders. They sat in companionable silence, the fire crackling between them. Outside, for the first time in days, the wind seemed to be gentling. It's easing, Jeremiah said. Storm will break by tomorrow night. Fear flashed across her face before she could hide it. Then they'll come. Then they'll come, he agreed. She looked at the wrapped maps, then back at him. The maps you carry, they'll start a war if they fall in the wrong hands. All those gold strikes, all those passages, the Shoshone showed them to my father in trust, in friendship. If Becker gets them, I know. Then you know I can't let that happen. I have to get them somewhere safe, to someone who'll use them right. There's no one like that, not when gold's involved. Then what do? For the first time since she'd awakened, her voice broke. I can't destroy them. They're all I have left of my father. 20 years of his life, but I can't let them start a war either. And I have nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Jeremiah watched tears track down her cheeks. This strong woman finally reaching the end of her strength. Without thinking, he moved to sit beside her on the bed, offering not touch, but presence. You're not alone, he said quietly. Whatever comes when this storm breaks, you won't face it alone. She looked up at him through her tears, and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition. Two damaged souls who'd found each other in the white wilderness, bound now by more than just chance and storm. Outside, the wind continued to die, and with it, their fragile sanctuary was ending. Soon, the world would come calling with its greed and guns, but for now, in the warmth of the dying fire, they sat together and did not speak of tomorrow. The morning after the storm broke dawned crystal clear, the kind of painful brightness that only comes when sunlight meets fresh snow. Jeremiah stood at the cabin's edge, reading signs in the white expanse. The storm had wiped the slate clean, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. How much time do we have? Elizabeth stood behind him, wrapped in his old coat, her breath misting in the cold air. Day, maybe two. Depends how far behind you they were when the storm hit. He pointed to the valley below. They'll come up from there, following the natural lines. Men always take the easiest path when they can. She moved beside him, her injured hands tucked carefully in the coat pockets. A week of healing had brought back her strength, though she still tired easily. I've put you in danger. I should leave. We've covered this ground. You're still not strong enough, and alone out there. You're dead inside a day. He turned back toward the cabin. Besides, running just delays the inevitable. Better to face it on ground we choose. That afternoon, word came in the form of smoke signals rising from the valley. Not Indian signs, but the crude mimicry of white men trying to communicate across distance. 3 columns of smoke, evenly spaced. Jeremiah's jaw tightened. What does it mean? Elizabeth asked. They're not just looking for you. They're coordinating multiple groups. He began checking his weapons. Movements, efficient and practiced. Becker's serious about those maps. But it wasn't Becker's men who arrived first. 2 days later, Jeremiah was checking trap lines when he caught movement in the trees. Not the clumsy crashing of hired guns, but the whisper-quiet approach of those who belonged to the land. He straightened slowly, hands visible and empty. I see you, grandfather, he said in Shoshone. I mean no harm. An ancient man emerged from the pines, followed by 2 younger warriors. Chief Joseph Standing Bear. Jeremiah had traded with his band before, shared meat when winters were hard. The old man's face was painted for war. Cole who walks alone, Standing Bear said in English. We have heard whispers on the wind. Maps that show the sacred places, the hidden waters, maps that would bring the diggers to tear the earth. Jeremiah felt the weight of the moment. One wrong word here, and things would go bad fast. The woman who carries them is under my protection. Her father was a friend to your people. He was killed for keeping your secrets. Standing Bear studied him for a long moment. Bring her. It wasn't a request. Jeremiah led them back to the cabin, noting how the younger warriors positioned themselves, ready for trouble but not starting it. Yet, Elizabeth emerged at their approach, and Jeremiah saw of her stiffen at the sight of the painted faces. To her credit, she didn't retreat. Miss Hartley, Jeremiah said carefully, this is Chief Standing Bear of the Eastern Shoshone. Chief, this is Charles Hartley's daughter. Recognition flickered in the old man's eyes. Hartley, who maps true. He walked with us many seasons, learned our ways. We showed him the secret paths because he had honor. His gaze hardened. Now he is dead, and vultures circle for what he protected. They killed him for it, Elizabeth said, her voice steady despite her fear. I've been trying to keep the maps from them, but I don't know how much longer I can. Standing Bear was quiet for a moment, then spoke in rapid Shoshone to his companions. The younger warriors looked unhappy but nodded. The maps must be destroyed. Standing Bear said finally, this is the only way. No. Elizabeth stepped forward, and Jeremiah caught her arm gently. Those maps are 20 years of my father's life. They're all I have left of him. And they will bring death to my people. Already the Bluecoats mass at Fort Laramie. Already the diggers sharpen their tools. Your father would not want his work to water the earth with blood. There has to be another way, Elizabeth insisted. Some way to preserve his work without... The crack of a rifle cut her short. Bark exploded from a tree inches from Standing Bear's head. The warriors reacted instantly, melting back into the forest as more shots rang out. Inside. Jeremiah shoved Elizabeth toward the cabin, drawing his Colt as he moved. He caught a glimpse of riders emerging from the tree line. At least 6, maybe more. They made it through the door as bullets thudded into the log walls. Jeremiah barred the door and moved to a gun port. Elizabeth already at another window with his spare rifle. Becker's men? She asked. He studied the riders through the narrow opening. Worse army. That's Lieutenant Morrison's unit out of Laramie. He cursed under his breath. They must have heard the same rumors. Cole, Morrison's voice carried across the snow. We know you're in there. Know you've got the woman and the maps. Come out peaceful-like, and maybe we forget about that desertion charge." "He's lying," Elizabeth said. "Of course he's lying." Jeremiah counted muzzle flashes from the trees. Standing Bear's warriors were keeping some of the soldiers pinned down, but it wouldn't last. Morrison would shoot me on sight just for the fun of it. More gunfire erupted, this time from the north. New riders appeared, rough-looking men in no uniform but trouble. Becker's hired guns had arrived, and suddenly it was a three-way fight with the cabin in the middle. "This is madness," Elizabeth said, wincing as a bullet shattered the window frame above her. "They're going to kill each other over those maps. That's the general idea." Jeremiah dropped a soldier who'd gotten too close to the door. "Welcome to the frontier, Miss Hartley, where gold dreams mean more than blood." The battle raged for an hour. Groups firing at each other, trying to gain position on the cabin. Standing Bear's warriors used the forest to their advantage, appearing and disappearing like ghosts. The soldiers had discipline but were caught in the open. Becker's men had numbers but no coordination. Then, as suddenly as it began, the shooting stopped. An uneasy silence fell over the blood-stained snow. "Cole!" A new voice, graveled, confident. Harrison Becker himself had arrived. "Let's discuss this like civilized men." "Nothing civilized about you, Becker," Jeremiah called back. "Perhaps not, but I'm a practical man. I've got 15 guns. Morrison's got 8 left. Those savages in the trees, maybe 5 or 6. You've got yourself and a woman. Mathematics aren't in your favor." Elizabeth looked at Jeremiah. "He's right. He usually is. Man didn't build an empire by being stupid." Jeremiah checked his ammunition, running low. "Question is, what's his play?" "I'll make this simple," Becker continued. "The woman brings out the maps. She walks to me. No harm comes to her. You keep breathing. Cole. Morrison gets to explain to his commanders how he lost half his unit chasing shadows. Everyone goes home. Except the Shoshone," Morrison shouted from his position. "Those murdering heathens killed 3 of my men, after you shot at them first." Jeremiah muttered, "I'll go." Elizabeth started to rise, but Jeremiah caught her wrist. "You walk out there. You're dead the second he has those maps. Becker doesn't leave witnesses." "Then what do we do?" Before he could answer, fire arrows began arcing from the forest, not aimed at the cabin, but at the positions where soldiers and hired guns had taken cover. Smoke began to rise as dry brush caught flame despite the snow. "Clever old fox," Jeremiah said with grim admiration. Standing Bear was literally smoking them out of their positions. The smoke spread, driven by mountain wind. Soon, men were coughing, stumbling from cover. The shooting began again, but wild now, undisciplined. In the confusion, Jeremiah saw their chance. "We go now," he said, grabbing his pack and rifle. "Out the back, into the trees, in this smoke. We might make it." Elizabeth didn't argue. She grabbed the wrapped maps and followed him out the cabin's rear window. They dropped into snow and ran, the sounds of battle echoing behind them. They'd made it 50 yards when a figure loomed out of the smoke. Morrison, his uniform torn and bloodied, pistol raised. "Going somewhere. Deserter?" Jeremiah pushed Elizabeth behind him. "Let her go. Morrison, your fight's with me. My fight's with anyone who harbors enemies of the United States." His eyes were wild, the look of a man who'd seen his orderly world explode into chaos. "Those maps belong to the government. Those maps belong to no one," Elizabeth said, stepping out from behind Jeremiah. "And that's where they're going to stay." She threw the wrapped package into the nearest flames. Morrison lunged forward with a cry, but Jeremiah's fist caught him square in the jaw, dropping him cold. "You burned them?" Jeremiah stared as the oilcloth blackened and curled. "Empty papers," she said quietly. "I burned the real maps days ago, right after you told me about Sand Creek. Kept these as a decoy." She looked back at the burning cabin, the gunfire, the chaos. "My father would understand. Some knowledge is too dangerous to preserve." Jeremiah felt something ease in his chest, respect for this woman growing into something deeper. "Standing Bear was right about you. You have your father's honor." They fled into the forest as the battle raged on behind them. Men killing each other for maps that no longer existed. The war had started, just as Elizabeth had predicted, but the prize they fought for was already ash on the wind. In the shadows of the pines, Standing Bear watched them go, then melted back into the wilderness with his warriors. The old chief understood. Some battles were won not by fighting, but by ensuring there was nothing left to fight for. Behind them, smoke rose from the burning cabin. Jeremiah's 7 years of solitude going up in flames. But as he led Elizabeth deeper into the mountains, her hand finding his in the gathering dusk, he realized he'd already found something worth more than any hideaway. The war for the maps would rage on. Men would die for illusions, but they would be far away by then. Two souls who'd found each other in the white wilderness, carrying nothing but hard-won wisdom and the fragile hope of tomorrow. The first night in the wilderness nearly killed them. Without his cabin, without proper supplies grabbed in haste. Jeremiah had only his knowledge and Elizabeth's determination to keep them alive. They carved a shelter beneath a fallen pine, its roots forming a natural windbreak, and huddled together as temperatures plummeted. "Can't risk a fire," he said, pulling pine boughs over them for insulation. Smoke would bring them running. Elizabeth's teeth chattered as she pressed closer to him, propriety abandoned in favor of survival. How long before they stop looking? Becker, never. Not until he's sure those maps are truly gone. He wrapped his coat around both of them. But Morrison's got wounded to tend, and those hired guns won't stick once the paying stops. Give it a week, maybe 2. They moved by night, resting in hidden valleys during the day. Jeremiah taught her the art of traveling without leaving signs stepping on rocks when possible, brushing out tracks, avoiding the soft snow that would hold prints. Elizabeth proved a quick student, her city softness hardening into mountain pragmatism. On the 3rd day, following a frozen creek through a narrow canyon, she slipped on ice-slick stones, her ankle twisted, sending her down hard. Jeremiah caught her before she hit the water, but the damage was done. "Just leave me," she gasped as he examined the swelling joint. "You can move faster alone. Thought we settled this back at the cabin." He fashioned a splint from birch bark and torn cloth. "I don't leave people behind. Stubborn fool. Takes one to know one." He carried her on his back for miles, her arms around his neck, her breath warm against his ear. When exhaustion forced him to stop, she limped alongside him, using a makeshift crutch, never complaining despite the pain written clearly on her face. They sheltered that night in a cave he'd used before during hunting trips. High enough to see anyone approaching from below, finally safe enough for a small fire, hidden deep in the cave's recesses. The warmth was almost painful after days of cold. "Why did you really burn them?" Jeremiah asked as they shared the last of his pemmican. "Your father's life work." Elizabeth stared into the flames for a long moment. "The night before he died, my father told me something. Said he'd been a fool, marking all those places. Said the Shoshone trusted him, and he'd betrayed that trust by putting their secrets on paper, even if he never meant for wrong hands to find them." She pulled something from inside her shirt, a small leather journal. "This is what I kept, his personal notes, drawings of the flowers he found, the animals, the beauty of these mountains. Nothing about gold or passages, just wonder." Jeremiah took the journal carefully, paging through sketches of eagles in flight, detailed studies of alpine flowers, notes about weather patterns and wildlife behavior. The work of a man who'd loved the land, not just mapped it. "This is worth more than all the gold in these mountains," he said softly. "Father would have liked you." She took the journal back, holding it like the treasure it was. "You see the land the way he did, not something to conquer, but something to understand." Their eyes met across the fire, and something shifted between them. Slowly, carefully, Elizabeth reached out and touched his face, fingers tracing the scar that ran along his jaw. "How?" she asked. "Shrapnel, Pea Ridge, back in '62. He caught her hand gently. "Elizabeth, I know. She didn't pull away. Wrong time, wrong place, wrong everything. But Jeremiah, we might die tomorrow. Those men won't stop hunting us, and I don't want to die with regrets. He drew her closer, her injured ankle forgotten as she settled against his chest. They didn't speak of love. That was a luxury for people with futures. But in the firelight's dance, with death perhaps hours away, they found comfort in each other's warmth, in the simple human need to not be alone in the darkness. Morning came too soon, and with it, the distant sound of horses. They've picked up our trail, Jeremiah said, dousing the fire. That ankle going to hold? It'll have to. She was already wrapping it tighter, gritting her teeth against the pain. They pushed hard through the day, but Elizabeth's injury slowed them. By afternoon, the pursuit was close enough to hear individual voices carrying on the thin mountain air. Jeremiah recognized Morrison's bark, Becker's graveled orders. They've joined forces, he said grimly. Must have decided finding us matters more than killing each other. They reached a river gorge as the sun touched the western peaks. The spring melt had turned the water into a roiling torrent, ice-cold and deadly. A fallen log spanned the narrowest point, maybe 2 feet wide, slick with spray. We have to cross, Jeremiah said. It's that or fight. Elizabeth looked at the log, then at her swollen ankle. I can't, not with this leg. Then we make our stand here. He began checking his weapons, counting ammunition. Not enough, not nearly enough. No. She gripped his arm. You cross. Take the journal. Find someone who'll appreciate what my father really discovered. The beauty, not the greed. We've been over this. Jeremiah Cole, you listen to me. Her green eyes blazed with fierce determination. You gave me a week more of life than I would have had. You showed me kindness when the world showed me only greed and violence. Don't make that meaningless by dying here with me. Meaning's what we make it, he said roughly. And I'd rather die beside you than live with leaving you. The first riders appeared on the ridge above them. Time was up. Then we cross together, Elizabeth said. If we fall together. Jeremiah looked at the log, at the raging water below, at the woman who'd somehow become everything in a handful of desperate days. Together. He went first, arms spread for balance, testing each step. The log was even more treacherous than it looked, slippery with moss and spray. Halfway across, he turned back for Elizabeth. She moved carefully, her injured ankle making every step agony. 10 feet out, she wobbled. 20 feet, and her ankle gave completely. Jeremiah lunged back, catching her as she started to fall. For a moment, they teetered on the edge of disaster, the river roaring below. Then his mountain-trained balance reasserted itself, and he pulled her against him. Don't look down, he said against her ear. Look at me, just at me. Step by agonizing step, he guided her backwards across the log, her weight against him, trusting him completely. Bullets began hitting the water around them as their pursuers reached the gorge. Cole, Morrison's voice rang out. Surrender now, and I might... The shot came from the trees on the far bank. Morrison spun and fell. More shots followed. Standing Bear's warriors, hidden in the forest, laying down covering fire. Jeremiah and Elizabeth stumbled off the log onto solid ground as the Shoshone war party emerged. The old chief himself stood there, war paint fresh, rifle smoking. The woman who burned the maps instead of betraying our trust. Standing Bear said, You have earned safe passage through our lands, both of you. Behind them, Becker's men retreated under the warriors' fire, dragging Morrison's body. The log bridge took several bullets and finally cracked, tumbling into the gorge. Pursuit, for now, was impossible. Why? Elizabeth asked the chief. Why help us? Because Hartley, who maps true, was our friend. Because his daughter proved worthy of that friendship. And because... The old man's eyes twinkled with something like humor. Cole, who walks alone no more. The mountains celebrate when a lonely soul finds its match. They traveled with the Shoshone band for 3 days, Elizabeth's ankle properly tended by their medicine woman. On the third night, Standing Bear came to their fire. Tomorrow we part ways. We go north to our summer grounds. You must choose your path. Jeremiah looked at Elizabeth. They'd spoken little of the future, focused only on survival. Now, suddenly, they had to decide. California, Elizabeth said quietly. I have a cousin in Sacramento. She'd take us in, help us start over. Us? Jeremiah asked. She took his hand. If you'll have me. A city woman with no skills for this life except stubbornness and a talent for causing trouble. I was thinking Oregon myself, he said. But California might do. Heard they need surveyors out there. Men who can read the land without destroying it. And women who can draw what they survey? She held up her father's journal. I learned more from him than just map reading. Standing Bear nodded approvingly. Then you go with our blessing? May the mountains be kind to you, and may you be kind to them in return. That night, as they lay beside the fire planning a future neither had imagined possible a week before, Elizabeth asked, Do you think they'll keep looking? Becker and the rest. For a while, but spring's coming. And there'll be new gold strikes, new rumors to chase. Eventually, they'll decide we died in that river, or got killed by Indians, or just disappeared into these mountains like smoke. And the real maps, ash and memory, the way your father wanted it in the end. She was quiet for a moment, then said, I'm glad it was you who found me in that blizzard. Of all the souls in these mountains, I'm glad it was you. Stubborn mountain hermit with a questionable past? My stubborn mountain hermit with a questionable past. She raised up on an elbow to look at him. Who's not going to be a hermit anymore? No, he agreed, pulling her close. Not anymore. In the distance, wolves howled at the rising moon, but the sound no longer seemed threatening. It was just another voice in the wilderness, like wind and water and the whisper of pine boughs. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new miles to cover, new dangers to face. But tonight, beside a banked fire in the heart of the mountains, two souls who'd saved each other from more than just winter's cold held tight to their improbable second chance. The maps that had nearly started a war were gone, but what remained, trust, courage, and the first tentative shoots of love, would prove far more valuable than gold. The town of Cedar Ridge sprawled across the valley like a wound in the earth, all raw lumber and mud streets, smoke rising from a dozen chimneys. After 3 weeks in the wilderness, the noise hit them like a physical blow hammering from the smithy, shouts from the saloons, the crack of teamsters' whips. We need supplies, Jeremiah said, studying the town from a ridge above. Food, ammunition, maybe horses if we can manage it. It's too dangerous. Elizabeth adjusted the worn hat they'd traded for with a traveling tinker, her hair tucked up underneath, in men's clothes borrowed from that same trader. She could pass for a young man from a distance. If word's reached here about the maps, it has. He pointed to a cluster of riders near the sheriff's office. Those are Becker's men. See the matched bay horses? He outfits all his gunmen the same. But they had no choice. Their food was gone, ammunition nearly spent, and Elizabeth's ankle, while healing, still needed proper bandaging. They waited for dusk, then made their way down. The general store sat on a side street, away from the main saloon row. Jeremiah left Elizabeth hidden in an alley while he went in, hat pulled low, moving with the rolling gait of a saddle-weary drifter. The proprietor, a thin man with nervous eyes, barely looked up. Help you? Need supplies for heading south. Coffee, beans, ammunition for a Henry rifle? As the man gathered the goods, the door chimed. Jeremiah didn't turn, but in the window glass he saw 2 men enter, rough types with tied-down guns. You hear about that surveyor's maps? One said to the proprietor. Mister, Becker's offering $1,000 gold for information. Says there's a woman traveling with them, probably with some mountain trash guide. Haven't seen any strangers, the proprietor said quickly. Too quickly. Jeremiah paid for his goods with the last of his coin, keeping his face turned away. He'd almost made the door when one of the gunmen spoke. You there, turn around. No choice now. Jeremiah turned slowly, hand drifting toward his pistol. Jake, that's him. The second man went for his gun. That's Cole. The store erupted. Jeremiah's first shot took Jake's center mass, spinning him into a display of canned goods. The second man fired wild, shattering the window. Jeremiah dove behind the counter as more shots peppered the walls. "Cole's here," someone shouted from outside. "He's in Morrison's store." Jeremiah cursed. The whole town would be on them in minutes. He put 2 shots through the door to keep the gunman's head down, then went out the shattered window in a shower of glass. Elizabeth met him in the alley, his spare pistol already in her hand. "So much for quiet. Can you ride?" "Better than I can run." They made for the livery stable at the town's edge. The old hostler took one look at Jeremiah's drawn gun and raised his hands. "Take whatever you need. I didn't see nothing." They were saddling 2 horses when hoofbeats thundered outside. Through the stable doors, Jeremiah saw riders converging from all directions. Too many to fight. "The loft," he said, boosting Elizabeth up the ladder. They burrowed deep into the hay as voices filled the stable below. "Check every stall. They're here somewhere." Jeremiah recognized Becker's voice now, the mining baron himself, drawn by news of his quarry. Hay dust filled their noses as men jabbed pitchforks into the loft, searching. A fork came within inches of Elizabeth's leg. She bit her lip to keep from crying out, her hand finding Jeremiah's in the darkness. "Mr. Becker!" A new voice from outside. "Telegraph just came in from Fort Laramie." The searching stopped. In the relative quiet, they could hear Becker reading aloud. "Army patrol found Lieutenant Morrison's body in River Gorge. Stop. Official investigation launched into missing government maps. Stop. Federal marshals dispatched to region. Stop. All civilians ordered to cease interference. Stop." Becker cursed long and creatively. "Federal marshals, that's all we need. What do we do, boss?" "We find Cole and the woman before the marshals do. Double the reward, 2,000 in gold, and spread the word. I want every bounty hunter, every track reader, every broke saddle tramp in 3 territories looking for them." The men filed out, leaving only the terrified hostler, after an eternity of silence. Jeremiah and Elizabeth climbed down. "We can't take the horses now," she said. "They'll be watching for us. Then we go on foot, back to the mountains." "No," her voice was firm. "We've been running for weeks, living like animals, looking over our shoulders. That's not a life. Jeremiah, not for either of us." "What are you suggesting?" "The federal marshals. If we could reach them first, tell them the truth, that the maps are destroyed, that Morrison died attacking civilians." She trailed off at his expression. "Elizabeth, I'm still a deserter in the Army's eyes. Those marshals would arrest me on sight. Then we keep running forever, until Becker's men catch us. Or we die in some forgotten valley." She gripped his arms. "There has to be another way." The hostler, who'd been trying to become invisible in the corner, cleared his throat. "Begging your pardon, but maybe there is." They turned to him, and he continued nervously. "There's a judge in Denver City, Judge Samuel Winters. He's got no love for Becker. The man tried to muscle in on his nephew's claim last year, near got the boy killed. If anyone would give you folks a fair hearing, Denver's 200 miles. Jeremiah said. "Across open country. The stage road runs through Pueblo first. Less watch than the direct route." The hostler moved to a wall map. "If you were to catch the midnight freight wagon heading to the mining camps, hide in the cargo." "Why help us?" Elizabeth asked. The old man shrugged. "Been in this town 30 years. Seen what Becker does to folks who cross him. About time someone stood up to him. Besides," he glanced at their joined hands, "I'm a romantic old fool. You two remind me of me and my Martha, back when we were young and stupid enough to think love could overcome anything." "And did it?" Elizabeth asked softly. 40 years married come September. So yeah, I reckon it did." They waited until the deepest part of the night, when even the saloons had quieted. The hostler had hidden them in his own quarters, sharing his meager supper and stories of the old days before men like Becker turned the frontier into a battlefield. The freight wagon sat in the darkness, loaded with mining equipment and supplies. The driver, the hostler's cousin, asked no questions, simply pointed to a hidden space between crates. "It'll be a rough ride," he warned. "But it'll get you to Pueblo by dawn. From there, you're on your own." They climbed in, pressed together in the cramped space. As the wagon rolled out of Cedar Ridge, Elizabeth whispered, "Do you think we're fools, believing we can find justice in a world run by men like Becker? Maybe, but that hostler and his Martha made it work. Standing Bear's people survived despite everything thrown at them. Maybe foolishness is what it takes. My father used to say the frontier was where people went to become who they really were. And who are we?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Survivors, fighters, maybe fools in love. That last part's certain." Through a gap in the crates, they watched the stars wheel overhead. The same stars that had witnessed their flight through the mountains, their desperate river crossing, all the miles of fear and hope. "Tell me about Oregon," Elizabeth said. "When all this is over, green valleys stretching to the sea, rain that falls soft, not like these harsh mountain storms, land that's never known the touch of gold fever. And we'll build a cabin, better than the one that burned, with windows facing west, so you can draw the sunset, a garden for vegetables, maybe some fruit trees. Children, if we're blessed, teach them to read the land like your father did, to see beauty instead of just profit. And if we don't make it, if Becker finds us, or the marshals arrest you," he pulled her closer in the darkness, "then we'll have had these weeks, these miles, more than some get in a lifetime." The wagon rolled on through the night, carrying them toward an uncertain dawn. Behind them, Cedar Ridge faded into darkness. Ahead lay Pueblo, Denver, and either justice or doom. But in that moment, hidden among the crates and cargo, two hearts beat as one. The maps that had nearly started a war were ash on the wind. But what they'd found in their place, trust forged in crisis, love born of desperation, burned brighter than any gold. The stars watched, silent witnesses to their passage. In a few hours, the sun would rise on a new day, bringing fresh dangers and fresh hopes. But for now, in the swaying darkness of the wagon, they had each other, and against all odds, all wisdom, all the harsh realities of the frontier, it was enough. The hostler's cousin drove on, whistling tunelessly, carrying his secret cargo toward whatever fate awaited. In the mountains behind them, wolves howled at the setting moon. The sound carried on the wind like a farewell, or perhaps a promise, wild things calling to wild things, survivors singing to survivors in the vast American night. Pueblo came into view as a gray smudge against the dawn sky, smoke from the smelters hanging like a shroud over the town. The freight wagon rolled to a stop at the depot, and Jeremiah helped Elizabeth climb down from their hiding place, both stiff from the night's journey. "Stage to Denver leaves at noon," the driver said quietly, not looking at them directly. "Might want to lay low until then. Plenty of Becker's men in town." They found refuge in a small church on the Mexican side of town, where the priest asked no questions and Elizabeth's handful of remaining coins bought them breakfast and silence. As they ate, the sound of horses thundered past outside, riders heading north, fast. "They know we slipped through Cedar Ridge," Jeremiah said. "They'll be watching the roads now." But it was worse than that. When they ventured out to buy stage tickets, they found wanted posters already nailed to every surface. Crude drawings, but recognizable enough. Cole and woman, wanted for murder of Lieutenant Morrison, armed and dangerous. $2,000 reward. Murder? Elizabeth stared at the poster in shock. "But Morrison was killed in the fight. Becker's writing the story now," Jeremiah said grimly. "Making us outlaws gives him legal cover to hunt us down." They made it onto the Denver stage by minutes, Elizabeth's face hidden beneath a widow's veil they'd bought from a second-hand shop. Jeremiah posing as her grieving brother. The other passengers, a mining engineer, a salesman, and a stern-faced woman heading to teach school, paid them little attention. 20 miles out of Pueblo, their luck ran out. The stage lurched to a halt, the driver's voice tight with fear. "Road agents! Folks! Everyone stay calm!" Through the window, Jeremiah counted 6 riders, bandanas covering their faces, but he recognized the matched bay horses, the silver conchos on their saddles, Becker's men, playing at being bandits. "Everyone out!" The lead rider's voice was muffled but familiar. Nice and easy. The passengers climbed out, hands raised. The schoolteacher was near tears, the salesman babbling about having little money. The masked men ignored them, their attention fixed on Elizabeth and Jeremiah. Well, well. The leader pulled down his bandana, revealing the scarred face of Becker's top gun, Wallace Creed. "Mrs. Hartley, Mr. Cole, Mr. Becker's been mighty worried about you folks." "It's done. Creed," Elizabeth said, lifting her veil. "The maps are destroyed. There's nothing left to fight over. That's for Mr. Becker to decide. He'd like a word, private-like." Jeremiah tensed. But Creed already had his pistol drawn. "Don't be a hero. Cole, you're worth the same to us dead or alive." They had no choice. Leaving the terrified passengers behind, they were forced onto horses and led into the Badlands east of the road. The hideout was an abandoned mine works, buildings crumbling but defensible. And there, waiting like a spider in his web, sat Harrison Becker. He was smaller than Jeremiah had expected, neat and precise in his movements, with the cold eyes of a man who calculated human life in profit margins. "Miss Hartley, Mr. Cole, you've led us quite a chase. The maps are gone, Becker," Elizabeth said. "Burned to ash weeks ago, so you say." He studied them with those reptilian eyes. "But you'll forgive me if I require proof. Men have died for those maps. Investments have been made. I need to be certain." "Then you'll be disappointed," Jeremiah said, "because ash doesn't leave much evidence." Becker smiled thinly. "We'll see. Creed, take Mr. Cole to the shaft house. Maybe sometime in the dark will refresh his memory. The lady stays with me. We have much to discuss." "No." Jeremiah moved to block them, but 3 guns swung his way. "It's all right," Elizabeth said quietly, though her eyes showed her fear. "We've survived worse." They dragged Jeremiah to a storage building near an old mine shaft. The beating was professional, methodical. Creed knew how to hurt a man without killing him. Through it all, Jeremiah gave them nothing but silence. "Tough one, ain't you?" Creed said, nursing bruised knuckles. "Let's see how tough you are after a night down the shaft." The mine shaft was a vertical drop into darkness, 30 feet down to water of unknown depth. They lowered him on a rope just far enough to keep his head above the black water, then tied it off. "You think on things," Creed called down. "Come morning, maybe you'll remember where those maps really are." In the darkness, Jeremiah tested his bonds, feeling the old timbers of the shaft walls, slimy with age, but solid. The water was ice cold, numbing his legs within minutes. He'd known men to die of exposure in situations like this, but he'd survived worse in the mountains. The question was what Becker was doing to Elizabeth. Above, in Becker's commandeered office, Elizabeth sat across from the mining baron, trying to keep her hands from shaking. He'd been polite so far, offering her tea, speaking of her father with seeming respect. Charles was brilliant, Becker said, but naive. He never understood that knowledge is power only if you use it. Those maps could have made us both rich beyond imagining. "My father wasn't interested in riches." "No? Then why spend 20 years mapping every gold deposit in the territories?" "Because he was a surveyor. It was his job to map what he found, but he also mapped the watersheds, the migration routes, the sacred sites. He saw the whole land, not just the parts that glittered." Becker leaned back in his chair. "And you destroyed all of it. Years of work, knowledge that could have built an empire. I destroyed the power to start a war. The Shoshone, the Cheyenne, the settlers, the miners, they'd have torn each other apart over those claims." "Progress demands sacrifice." "Whose sacrifice? Yours or theirs?" His eyes hardened. "You're very much your father's daughter, idealistic, impractical." He stood, moving to the window. "But perhaps we can reach an accommodation. You see, I don't actually need the maps themselves. I need what they represented, legitimacy, a story to tell investors, Government officials, the public. What are you suggesting? You draw new maps, from memory. Leave out the sensitive areas. Give me enough to stake claims on, and I'll let you and Cole go. You can have your life together, far from here. And if I refuse, he didn't turn from the window. Your friend is currently 30 feet down a flooded shaft. Cold water, they tell me, is quite painful after the first hour. Fatal after 6. You've been here 2 hours already. Elizabeth's heart clenched, but she kept her voice steady. You're asking me to betray everything my father stood for. I'm offering you a chance to save the man you love. Surely that's worth a few lines on paper. She was silent for a long moment, then said, I need proof Jeremiah's still alive. Becker nodded to Creed, who left and returned minutes later. He's singing down there, some army marching song, tough bastard. Relief flooded through her. If Jeremiah was singing, he was fighting. And if he was fighting, she could too. I'll need paper, good quality, and proper ink. Becker smiled, thinking he'd won. He provided what she asked, then left her under guard to work. Elizabeth bent over the paper, her father's trained hand moving with remembered precision. Mountains took shape. Rivers curved across the page, but every line was a lie. Every landmark shifted, every passage made false. She created a masterwork of misdirection, maps that would lead men in circles until they gave up in frustration. As she worked, she heard shouting outside. Through the window, she saw riders approaching, not Becker's men, but Shoshone warriors, war paint bright in the afternoon sun. At their head rode Standing Bear himself. The shooting started immediately. Becker's men scrambled for cover as arrows and bullets filled the air. In the chaos, Elizabeth's guard ran to join the fight, leaving her momentarily alone. She didn't hesitate, grabbing a lamp and smashing it against the desk. Fire bloomed across the false maps, consuming them as thoroughly as she'd burned the real ones. She ran for the shaft house, dodging gunfire. The rope was still tied off, Jeremiah's voice echoing from below. She began hauling him up, her hands burning on the rough hemp, muscles screaming with effort. Elizabeth? His voice was hoarse but strong. Hold on, almost there. He emerged from the darkness like a man reborn, soaked and shivering but alive. They clung to each other for a moment before the battle's roar reminded them of the danger. Standing Bear, Jeremiah said, taking in the scene. How did he find us? The same way he survived all these years, Elizabeth said, by knowing this land better than any map could show. They fought their way toward the Shoshone lines. Jeremiah with a captured rifle, Elizabeth with his pistol. Creed tried to stop them, emerging from behind a ore cart with his gun raised. Jeremiah's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him down. Cole, Becker's voice rose above the gunfire. This isn't over. But it was. His men, caught between the shaft house and the warrior's position, began throwing down their weapons. Standing Bear rode forward, his presence commanding even in the midst of battle. The woman who speaks truth, he said to Elizabeth. You burned papers again? False ones this time, she admitted. The old chief actually smiled. Good. Let them chase lies while truth remains free. He looked at the surrendering gunman, then at Becker, who stood defiant despite his defeat. These men invaded our lands, by treaty rights. They're ours to judge. You can't, Becker sputtered. I have connections. The governor himself. The governor is far away, Standing Bear said calmly. And federal marshals are coming who will ask hard questions about Lieutenant Morrison's death, about wanted posters for innocent people, about private armies on Indian land. Understanding dawned in Becker's eyes. He was trapped between savage justice and civilized law, with no good options in either direction. However, Standing Bear continued, we are not without mercy. You and your men may go, but if any of you set foot in our territories again, chasing maps or gold or anything else, we will not be so generous. It was over within an hour. Becker and his surviving men rode out, defeated and disarmed. The Shoshone gathered their wounded, preparing to melt back into the mountains. Standing Bear approached Jeremiah and Elizabeth one last time. "Your path is clear to Denver now. The judge there, Winters, is expecting you. We sent word." "How did you know?" Elizabeth asked. "The land speaks to those who listen. Now go. Find your peace. Make your life. And remember, some treasures are too precious for maps." They watched the warriors disappear into the Badlands, then turned their own horses toward Denver. Behind them, smoke rose from the burning mine buildings. Ahead, the mountains stood purple against the evening sky, holding their secrets close. "It's over," Elizabeth said wonderingly. "It's really over. The maps, maybe, Becker, for now." Jeremiah reached over to take her hand. "But not us. We're just beginning." She smiled through her exhaustion. "Oregon? By way of Denver. Let's see what Judge Winters has to say about clearing our names. Then yes, Oregon. That cabin facing west. That garden. That life we talked about." They rode on as stars began to pierce the darkening sky. Two battered souls who'd found each other in the worst of circumstances and held on through fire and ice. Greed and violence. The maps that had started it all were truly gone now. But what remained? Love tested by extremity. Trust forged in desperation would guide them better than any survey ever could. The frontier stretched before them, vast and uncertain. But they faced it together now, and that made all the difference. The outskirts of Denver revealed a city swollen with ambition and greed, its streets teeming with fortune seekers, speculators, and the desperate poor who served them. Jeremiah and Elizabeth entered at dusk, exhausted from their ordeal, seeking Judge Winters' residence on the quieter side of town. They never made it. The attack came swift and brutal, not Becker's men this time, but others drawn by the bounty. Shots rang out from an alley, and Jeremiah's horse screamed, going down hard. He rolled clear, pulling Elizabeth with him as bullets sparked off the cobblestones. "The livery stable!" He pointed to a building across the street, returning fire to cover their retreat. They burst through the doors into lantern light and the smell of hay. The hostler dove for cover as their pursuers followed, guns blazing. In the confined space, the fight turned savage close quarters. Desperation on all sides. A bounty hunter got too close. Jeremiah's knife found his throat. Hot blood spraying across hay bales. Another man charged Elizabeth. She shot him point blank, his body crashing into a stall, spooking the horses into a frenzy. Then the lamp fell. Oil spread across scattered straw, and flame followed, hungry and immediate. Within seconds, the stable was an inferno. Horses screaming, men shouting, smoke filling every breath. "This way!" The hostler, brave despite his terror, led them through the spreading fire to a back exit. They stumbled out as the roof began to collapse. The bounty hunter's screams lost in the roar of flames, but Denver's violence was just beginning. The stable fire spread to neighboring buildings, and with it spread the word. Cole and the woman were in town. Every manhunter, every desperate soul looking for Becker's reward, converged on the burning block. "We need to reach the judge." Elizabeth coughed through the smoke. "It's our only chance." They ran through streets turned battlefield. A group of miners, drunk on whiskey and greed, tried to corner them near the assay office. Jeremiah shot two before they scattered. Near the bank, 3 bounty hunters opened fire from a rooftop. Elizabeth, with her father's steady hand, dropped one with Jeremiah's rifle while he reloaded. The violence fed on itself. Other conflicts erupted. Old grudges settled under cover of chaos. Robberies attempted while the law was distracted. Denver, always balanced on the edge of civilization, tipped into anarchy. They finally reached Judge Winters' house to find it under siege. Federal marshals had arrived, not to arrest them, but to protect the judge from a mob convinced he was harboring the fugitives. Gunfire erupted from every window as the mob pressed closer. "Judge Winters!" Jeremiah shouted over the noise. "We're Cole and Hartley. We're coming in!" A marshal cracked the door. "Move fast!" They dove through as bullets splintered the door frame. Inside, Judge Samuel Winters sat calmly at his desk, gray-bearded and dignified despite the chaos. "Mr. Cole, Miss Hartley, you've stirred quite the hornet's nest." The maps are destroyed, Elizabeth said urgently. Morrison died attacking us. We can prove. Later. The judge ducked as a window shattered. First we survive this. Marshal Richards. What's your count? 6 men down, maybe 20 still shooting, and I hear more coming. Through the broken windows, they could see riders approaching, Standing Bear's warriors, drawn by the smoke and violence, but also more manhunters, Becker's reinforcements, even a company of cavalry trying to restore order, all converging on this point, all ready for blood. This is madness, Elizabeth whispered. All for maps that no longer exist. Greed doesn't need logic, Judge Winters said. It only needs a target. The battle erupted in full. Shoshone warriors, seeking to protect those who'd earned their trust, clashed with bounty hunters in the streets. The cavalry, confused about who was enemy and who was ally, fired at anyone armed. Becker's men, arriving to find chaos, added their guns to the mixture. From the judge's house, they watched Denver tear itself apart. Buildings burned, bodies littered the streets, the thin veneer of civilization stripped away to show the savage heart beneath. This was what the maps would have brought to the entire territory, multiplied 100-fold. We have to stop this, Jeremiah said. People are dying for nothing. How? Marshal Richards demanded. You go out there, you're dead in seconds. But Elizabeth was already moving, before anyone could stop her. She was at the door, then through it, standing on the judge's porch in full view of the mob. Stop! Her voice carried over the gunfire. I'm Elizabeth Hartley. I'm the one you want. The shooting faltered, attention turning to her. Jeremiah tried to follow, but she held up a hand. Listen to me. The maps you're killing for, they're gone. Burned weeks ago. Lies, someone shouted. She's got them hidden. Then search me. She spread her arms wide. Take me to Becker. Let him question me himself, but stop this senseless killing. Becker himself emerged from the crowd, his neat appearance incongruous among the blood and smoke. Miss Hartley, how noble. But you'll forgive us if we don't take your word. Then take this. She pulled her father's journal from inside her coat. The one thing she'd kept. My father's personal notes. The only record left of his work. Look inside. You'll find drawings of flowers, notes about weather, nothing about gold, nothing worth a single life, let alone this massacre. Becker took the journal, paging through it. His face darkened as he found exactly what she'd said. Beauty, wonder, knowledge, but nothing that could be turned to profit. You burned them? His voice was flat. You really burned them? Twice, once real, once false. She stood straighter. Because I saw what they would bring. This, she gestured at the burning city, multiplied across every mountain, every valley. Is that the legacy you want, Mr. Becker? To be remembered as the man who turned the territories into a graveyard. For a moment, the mining baron stood silent. Around them, the shooting had stopped. Everyone waiting. Even Standing Bear's warriors held their fire, watching. Then Becker laughed. A bitter, broken sound. 20 years of planning, fortune beyond measure, and a woman with matches took it all away. He looked at his men. Stand down. It's over. But Mr. Becker, Creed protested, arms still in a sling from their last encounter. I said it's over. Becker's composure finally cracked. There are no maps. There never will be, and I'll not add to this butcher's bill for a dream that's turned to ash. Slowly, weapons lowered, the mob began to disperse, the spell of greed broken by the reality of blood. The cavalry moved in to restore order, medics tending the wounded. Standing Bear's warriors melted away as quietly as they'd come. Judge Winters emerged from his house, marshals flanking him. Mr. Becker, you'll answer for the bounties you posted, false charges of murder, inciting violence. I'll answer in court, Becker said tiredly. But I think you'll find the territorial governor quite understanding. Men of vision are rarely prosecuted for their ambitions. He walked away. His empire of dreams collapsed, but his freedom intact. Such was frontier justice, harsh for the poor, lenient for the rich. As for you two, Judge Winters turned to Jeremiah and Elizabeth. The murder charges are dropped. Lieutenant Morrison's death has been ruled a lawful killing in self-defense, based on witness testimony from the Shoshone and evidence of his aggression. Mr. Cole, your desertion, that's an Army matter. But I've sent word to Fort Laramie. Given the circumstances of Sand Creek, they're willing to let sleeping dogs lie. You're free. Free. After all the running, all the blood. They were free. Jeremiah pulled Elizabeth close as Denver smoldered around them, the cost of their freedom written in smoke and graves. It shouldn't have come to this, Elizabeth said, tears cutting tracks through the soot on her face. All these deaths, all this destruction. The maps were just the match, Judge Winters said sadly. The kindling was always here, greed, desperation, the willingness to kill for fortune. You did right burning them, Miss Hartley. Some knowledge is too dangerous to preserve. They stayed 2 days in Denver, long enough to see some semblance of order restored. The final tally was grim. 37 dead, twice that wounded. A quarter of the business district burned, all for maps that had ceased to exist before the first shot was fired. Standing Bear came to see them before they left, his warriors having camped outside town. You carry heavy spirits, he observed. The weight of those who died. We lit the fuse, Jeremiah said, even if we didn't mean to. No, men's greed lit the fuse long ago. You only showed them there was nothing to gain from the explosion. The old chief looked at the burned district. Perhaps now they'll understand. Some treasures aren't meant to be found. Some knowledge isn't meant to be mapped. The earth keeps its secrets for good reason. He left them with a blessing and a warning. Your path leads west. Follow it. But know that men like Becker don't forgive. He'll honor the law for now, but hatred has long memory. Watch your backs. As they prepared to board the westbound stage, Elizabeth asked, was it worth it, all of this, just to end up where we started, running west with nothing but hope? Jeremiah thought of his cabin, burned, of the life he'd built in solitude, destroyed, of the peace he'd found in the mountains, shattered. Then he looked at the woman beside him, brave beyond measure, principled despite the cost, willing to face down armies for what she believed right. Ask me in Oregon, he said, taking her hand. When we're sitting on that porch facing west, when the only gold we care about is in the sunset, ask me then if it was worth it. She squeezed his hand as the stage rolled out of Denver, leaving smoke and sorrow behind. Ahead lay 2,000 miles of uncertainty, but they faced it together, and that made all the difference. Behind them, Denver began the slow work of rebuilding. The dead were buried, the fires doused, the rubble cleared. But in saloons and mining camps, the legend grew of maps that could have made men rich beyond dreaming, of a woman who burned fortune itself rather than let it destroy what she loved, of a war fought over ashes and illusion. And Harrison Becker sat in his office, staring at Charles Hartley's journal, seeing only flowers where he dreamed of gold. 6 months later, on the Oregon coast, morning fog rolled in from the Pacific like a blessing. Jeremiah stood on the porch of their small cabin, coffee steaming in his hands, watching Elizabeth work in her garden. The plants were young yet, beans and squash, herbs she'd learned about from a local Chinook woman, but growing strong in the rich soil. Letter came yesterday, she called, not looking up from her weeding. From Denver. He tensed, old instincts still sharp. Trouble? No, Judge Winters. He wanted us to know. She paused, brushing dirt from her hands. Becker's dead, shot by one of his own men over a card game. Apparently, losing his empire made him reckless. He died broke, bitter, and alone. Jeremiah felt no satisfaction, only a hollow sadness. All those lives lost, and for what? He ended with nothing anyway. Elizabeth joined him on the porch, leaning into his warmth. Father used to say the mountains give each man what he truly seeks. Becker sought gold and found greed. Morrison sought glory and found a grave. We sought survival and found each other. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun burn through the fog. The cabin wasn't large, 2 rooms and this porch, But they'd built it with their own hands on land, bought honest with the last of Elizabeth's inheritance. The nearest neighbor was 2 miles off, the nearest town a day's ride. Not quite the isolation of Jeremiah's mountain retreat, but peaceful enough. The dreams still come sometimes, Elizabeth said quietly. The burning stable, the bodies in Denver streets, that moment when I thought I'd lost you down the mine shaft. They come to me too, but less now. He set down his coffee, took her face gently in his hands. We survived it. Elizabeth, we're here. We're building something real. A horse's whinny interrupted them. Riders approaching. Jeremiah's hand moved instinctively toward the rifle just inside the door. Old habits died hard. But as the visitors emerged from the tree line, Elizabeth gasped in recognition. Standing Bear, accompanied by 2 younger men, one of whom she recognized from the battles in the mountains. They dismounted with the careful movements of men who'd ridden far. "Chief," Jeremiah said. "Surprised? You're a long way from your lands. All lands are connected." Standing Bear replied, his eyes taking in their small homestead. "We came west to speak at the Treaty Council in Salem, but also to see how the map burner and the lonely walker fare in their new life." They welcomed their guests. Elizabeth serving coffee and the bread she'd baked that morning. The Shoshone had news of the territory's relative peace since the Denver violence. New gold strikes further south, drawing the desperate away from their traditional lands. At least for now. "And your people?" Elizabeth asked. "We survive, as we always have. The whites come and go like seasons. Some harsh, some mild. But all passing. We remain." Standing Bear studied them. "You have found peace here." "We have," Jeremiah confirmed. "As much peace as the world allows." The old chief nodded approvingly, then surprised them both by producing a wrapped bundle. Inside was a beautifully woven blanket, patterns telling stories in thread and color. "A wedding gift," he said, noting their clasped hands. "Late, but my people believe the best gifts come after the couple has proven their bond through trials." Elizabeth traced the patterns with wondering fingers. "It's beautiful, but we haven't, that is, we're not officially. The mountains witnessed your vows," Standing Bear said simply. "When you chose each other over gold, over safety, over life itself, what more official ceremony could there be?" After the Shoshone left, promising to stop again on their return journey, Elizabeth and Jeremiah walked down to the beach. The Pacific stretched endless before them, waves rolling in with patient persistence, wearing down the hardest stones into smooth sand. "He's right, you know," Jeremiah said, "about us being married already. But if you want the words said proper, there's a preacher in town." Elizabeth smiled, threading her arm through his. "Maybe someday, when we've saved enough, when the garden's established, when we've proven to ourselves this peace is real." Something like that. They walked in silence, leaving footprints that the tide would soon erase. Behind them, smoke rose from their cabin's chimney. Not the angry smoke of destruction they'd left in Denver, but the gentle smoke of home, of hearth, of life continuing despite all odds. "I've been thinking," Elizabeth said as they turned back, "about Father's work, not the maps, those are gone forever, but his other observations, the flowers, the weather patterns, the animal behaviors. I could continue that work, document this new land the way he documented the mountains. Without the gold, without the secrets that kill. Charles Hartley's daughter, following in his footsteps. Elizabeth Cole, making her own path." She glanced at him. "If you don't mind the presumption." "No presumption about it. Standing Bear had it right. We made our vows in blood and fire. Everything else is just paperwork." That night, as rain pattered gently on their roof, Elizabeth worked by lamplight, sketching the coastal plants she'd found, making notes about soil and climate. Jeremiah cleaned his rifle. Some habits would never fade, but also worked on furniture for their sparse cabin, hands that had dealt death now crafting life. "Do you ever regret it?" Elizabeth asked suddenly. "The life you had before, the solitude." "I regret the path that led me to solitude. Sand Creek. The things I saw, couldn't stop. He set down his tools. But that path also led me to that blizzard. To you. How can I regret the darkness when it brought me to light? We survived the blizzard, and we'll survive the rest, she quoted back to him, smiling. That we will. Later, as they lay listening to the rain and the distant ocean, Elizabeth said, I want to write it down someday. All of it, so people understand what really happened. Not the legend that's already growing, but the truth, the cost of greed, the price of principle, the maps that started a war by ceasing to exist. Who would believe it? Maybe no one, but I'll know it's true. We'll know. She was quiet for a moment. Do you think we'll ever truly be free of it? The shadow of those maps? Jeremiah pulled her close, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. The maps are gone, Becker's gone, Morrison's gone. The gold they fought for is still hidden in the mountains, keeping its own secrets. What shadows can the dead cast? But even as he said it, he remembered Standing Bear's warning about the long memory of hatred. Somewhere, perhaps, Creed still nursed his wounded arm and wounded pride. Somewhere, men still dreamed of lost treasure, convinced the maps had survived. The frontier was vast, but it was also small paths crossed. Words traveled, legends grew. For now, though, they had this: rain on the roof, warmth in their bed, the vast Pacific singing them to sleep. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, crops to tend, cabin to improve, life to build from scratch. But tonight, in their small corner of Oregon, two survivors of the map war held each other and believed in peace. The mountains had tested them with ice and blood. The desert had tried them with greed and violence. But here, where the continent met the sea, they'd found what no map could ever mark: home, hope, and the hard-won wisdom that some treasures are worth burning the world to protect, while others are worth burning to save the world from their discovery. In her father's journal, preserved among the flower sketches, Elizabeth had written a new entry: the true survey of a land is not in its gold or passages, but in the lives it allows to flourish. We map our days now not in silver and stone, but in planted seeds and shared sorrows overcome. This is the only geography that matters, the territory of two hearts that found each other in the white wilderness and refused to let go. The rain continued, washing the world clean, and in a small cabin on the Oregon coast, two cartographers of the human heart drew new maps with every breath, every touch. Every morning they woke to find peace had lasted another day. The war was over. Their life had begun. And somewhere in the Rockies, the hidden gold slept on, guarding its secrets, letting the mountains heal from the wounds men had carved in their flanks. The maps were ash, but the land endured, as did love, against all odds. In the face of all greed, Standing Bear had been right. They'd already said their vows in the only church that mattered, under the only authority that counted. The wilderness had witnessed their union, and what the wilderness has joined, no man could tear asunder. Thank you all for listening to this tale of love and survival in the American frontier. I'd love to know where in the world you're hearing this story. Please share your location in the comments below so we can connect across the miles. If you enjoyed this Wild West romance, please subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts. What part of Elizabeth and Jeremiah's journey touched you most? Let me know in the comments.